So Tony, the Open is almost upon us, and you are synonymous for a number of things, particularly in golf. One of which is the Open. You of course won the Open in '69. Before we talk about that experience, how does a boy from Scunthorpe, son of a truck driver, get himself in a position to be someone who can even compete at something like the Open? It must have been a journey just to get to there.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, timing is everything. It was 1953, my father got introduced to the game, and, I was 13, I was about 9, then, and I went along, I used to pull his trolley. There was nothing to do where I lived, close to where I lived in town. There was no money, no toys and stuff. It was a boring sort of early existence. And I used to go with my dad. That was interesting, pull his trolley, and saw his frustration. But when with golf at that time, and when we were out of the members' way, I would have a go. And it wasn't long before I got cut down hickory clubs and was able to participate. And I knew that ball wasn't going to move until I moved it. And so the summers were spent, slept at home, and I spent the rest of the time on the golf course, intrigued by the fact that this thing wouldn't move. Ben Hogan had won the Open Championship and 2 other majors. He didn't play in the PGA that year, but he was the predominant player. Sports, or Golf Illustrated was the only magazine we had. We certainly didn't have television or any golf on television. But I saw how important Hogan thought the fundamentals were. I followed those to a T, and I had all the hours God sent to get good. Before I knew where I was 13, and I was pretty competent. Then I had a 12 handicap. And a couple of things happened that year. Bobby Locke came to the club to visit and play an exhibition with our professional, who was probably at best about an 8 handicap, God bless him. And I was dispatched to the other end at the clinic when Locke was giving a clinic, and he hit his first ball and it plugged, and I prized it out of the ground, put it in the wiped it off, put it in the bag, and the next shot he hit went straight into the same pitch mark. And it was an impressionable age, 13, and I thought, my God, there's still a ways to go. But that stuck, and later that year, the Ryder Cup came to Lindrick, which was 60 miles away from Scunthorpe. My dad was keen by then, did I want to go and see, and that was the first opportunity I had to see world-class players. Coupled with the fact it was a watershed year for Great Britain and Ireland because Dairese's team won. But for me, it was an opportunity to get up close to the best players in the world. And I went back to the club that night and played and inspired the best 9 holes I'd ever played. And it went on from there. I became a county player. All I wanted to do was be a professional. There was no money to do that. It meant leaving home and going to London because no clubs in Lincolnshire could afford assistant professionals. My dad wasn't up for that because there was too much risk. I went into the steelworks like most of the young lads in Scunthorpe did and spent a year there, which I hated, and secretly wrote off for jobs. And I got an interview at Potter's Bar in North London, and I pleaded with my father to take me. And I said, if you don't like what you hear, then we'll come back. But of course, Bill Shanklin, who was a great salesman, convinced my father that £6 a week working for him was better than £3.11 and threepence at the steelworks. And January '62, I was on my road as a professional. And quickly I learned that I didn't want to be in the shop doing all the mundane things club professionals have to do. And so I continued to work hard at my game and played well in the Middlesex Championship that year and played in my first Open in 1963. I made the cut and really never looked back. Bill Shanklin and I were a bit like this all the time. And I started to play in 1963 the British and Irish circuit. I continued to improve because I was playing with better players all the time, learning from them. And by the time 1967 came round, I was got my first Masters invitation. I was in the Far East playing, and got drawn with no other than Arnold Palmer in the first 2 rounds, who I was petrified, of course, hardly slept, but somehow managed to, stay with him, beat his score, get people's attention. And I would have to say that that was the beginning of the real run. Later that year, I won the Dunlop Masters, had the first hole-in-one on British TV. But people think that's marvellous, but of course in those days they only televised the last 3 holes, and if there wasn't a par 3 there, you couldn't do it. But I got my tour card in America, and in the spring of '68, won for the first time. I was on the ascendancy, and I was hungry, and I was ambitious, and I was young and resilient, and nothing was going to get in the way. And that win at Jacksonville, ironically, was playing alongside Palmer and Don January in the final round. And of course the gallery was all a bit biased towards them. I was a sort of imposter at the time. But that stood me in good stead mentally. I was becoming tougher and tougher and tougher. And by the time '69 came round, I got to Royal Lytham, where I'd already done nicely 6 years before. The British galleries were there, and they were behind me, and that was an uplifting feeling. I managed to get off to a reasonable start, and I was in the mix early, and gradually got to where I was leading the thing. And Bob Charles and I played the last round together. I kept my nose ahead, and I had that sort of mental toughness that I'd learned, in that 2 or 3 years coming up to it. I had the resilience and mental toughness to fortunately get it done, and it was, of course, a life changer.
When you went into that Open, you had huge self-belief, didn't you? When you consider it was and will always be seen as one of the great eras of golf. You mentioned Palmer, there was Player, there was Nicklaus, there was Saracen. I mean, there were so many guys, household names in sport, let alone golf. Where did that belief come from? Because British golf wasn't littered with global names, not then, and indeed for many years before. But by the '69 Open, you believed you could take these guys on, didn't you?
Yeah, well, as I say, I was ambitious, and it makes me smile today, or modern day, that so many of these young players relate to their coaches, and but I didn't think there was any better way to learn than playing alongside the best players in the world. And I knew that if I wanted to, and I'd put it in my mind, and I think this is the greatest computer the world's ever known. I mean, not my mind, but the human mind. And I'd put it in there that I wanted to be the best player on the planet. And I knew in order to do that, I had to beat these guys that I was playing against. Nicklaus, Player, Palmer, Trevino, whoever it was. And so I was picking their brains, and I had a good imagination. I was watching everything they did very, very closely, and just making headway all the time. So, but the most important thing of all was that I'd put it in my head, and once I got the opportunity to do it, I wasn't shocked. And I think if you haven't put it in there in the first place, that you get the opportunity sometimes, and now what? But it wasn't, I'm not saying it was easy, it's never easy, but at least if you've put it in there, you can deal with it. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I visualized. This is what I dreamed of. This is what I wanted. Come on, one foot in front of the other. You can do this. And so it goes.
Golf is littered with famous shots. If you did your sort of 12 greatest shots in golf, you'd name 12 which everybody would recognise and remember. And arguably, your greatest shot in golf, at least the one that most people remember, was the drive on the 18th. Perhaps you'd like to set the scene and explain why it is remembered to this day as one of the great shots in golf.
Well, back in those days with the equipment we had, persimmon drivers and a Bellata ball, the 18th hole at Lytham, there was no way to play safe. We all carried one irons in our bags as our safety club for driving, keeping the ball in play, and it would make it run. The links golf still played on the ground, but with a one iron I couldn't clear the cross bunkers at Lytham, so it was impossible to play safe. To lay up short of those would have been crazy. It would have left far too long a second shot. So it was one of those situations. It was driver or nothing. And the bunkers at each side of the fairway are so deep that if you go in them, you can't get on the green. And I was more than aware of the fact that Eric Brown, who was Ryder Cup captain, and Scott, and Dave Thomas and Christy O'Connor Sr. had all had opportunities at Lytham and made bad scores on the final hole, which cost them dear. So it was a really important tee shot, and I can remember like it was yesterday because I was so mentally engaged, teeing the ball up and just saying, this is what you've worked for, wide and smooth, and as I'm saying it, I'm doing it. And really that's what being in the moment is all about. And I was wide, I was smooth, I looked up and this thing's flying down the middle of the fairway, and obviously to say that there was relief there, it would be an understatement. But I think Longhurst, I saw later, he'd said, something to the effect of, what a corker, the longest all day or whatever it was. And but it still wasn't over, but that broke its back. That was 60% of that hole, getting that tee shot where I've got it. And I had a nice, easy 7-iron to the green, and walking down there, lost my shoe. The gallery all came in, of course. They let the gallery in on the final group, and I got lost in there, and somebody stood on my heel. And then I remember putting my shoe back on, but being too embarrassed to sort of stay and tie the lace. I waited so the shoe was sort of half hanging off, and I was waving at everybody. But it was an incredible experience, an incredible time.
And I think I'm right in saying it was the first time on British TV that the audience could watch a golf tournament in colour.
Exactly. Yeah.
So all the stars were aligned
Yeah.
for you in a sense, because you got your first hole-in-one on TV,
Yeah.
and now a British champion of the Open in donkey's years in colour, wonderful colour.
Yeah.
So that presumably only added to how your life changed as a result of winning the Open.
Yeah, it was a special time, and 25 years old, and it all that happened really, within 2 years, getting that Masters invitation, because I was in the Far East. Neil Coles was, they invited the top 4 on our order of merit. Neil Coles wouldn't fly, he was the 4th. So they went down to 5th, which was me. And I got this telegram saying that I was in the Masters, and really everything started to escalate from there. And of course, at that point in time, I didn't know I was going to win the US Open 11 months later. So I was kind of on top of the world, I suppose.
Now you were. Now we'll talk a little bit later about sort of the second coming of Tony Jacklin, which was the Ryder Cup. But that period of time is, as you say, 11 months after winning the Open, you go and win the US Open as well. And for 11 months, you were, I think, arguably, if not definitely, the best player in the world.
Yeah, well, I had those 2 major trophies on my mantelpiece for a month or so. Ironically, I only had one. I don't know whether I even had a picture of both of them together taken, because in those days it didn't seem important, to record things to the point it does today. But suffice to say, it was a heady time. It was a hectic time, trying to be all things to all people, wondering what I should do, obligation-wise, and so on and so forth. And being the first to have done it, especially from the UK, it wasn't all plain sailing, but it was a fantastic time for me professionally and as an individual. My dreams had all come true, and I was still only 25 years old.
One of the great stories about you in the US Open, I mean, just think it happening today, was what you did with your cheque. Perhaps you'd like to share that one with us.
Well, it went to the cleaners, is what had happened. I left it in my back pocket, and I was wearing a pair of. I used to wear light-coloured. I used to like bright colours, and anyway, it inadvertently got left in my pocket and got.
This is for how much?
Washed $30,000. Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it was.
Now, and even more so then.
Yeah, fortunately they knew who I was and they wrote me another cheque. I think that I don't quite know how it all ended up, but I got the dough in the end anyway.
And also, this was I think it's probably fair to say that the whole birth of the European Tour, John Jacobs, the European Tour, began and rode on the crest of a wave that you had created.
Yeah, I think there was a resurgence of interest in golf at that time because of my major wins. And from a personal standpoint, of course, I should have been in America and stayed in America on the American tour. I did for a year or so, but I was still living, and my home was in the UK, and I was doing a lot of back and forth. And 6 or 8 times across the Atlantic every year doing, and as I say, trying to be all things to all people. My manager at the time, Mark McCormack, was just sort of going global with his brand, IMG. Gene Shrimpton and Jean-Claude Keeley and Jackie Stewart, those names he was managing, and he wanted me in Europe. I didn't realise at this point that I was a bit of a pawn in a bigger game, but by the time it got to 1972, I was pretty jaded with all of this back and forth, and decided to help John Jacobs with his ideas for the European Tour. And I came and played in Scandinavian Open, the German Open, the Italian Open, which I won in '73, and I won a couple of those big European events. But it was hard early because there was not much in Europe. There wasn't the standard that there had been in America in terms of course maintenance and so on, and there was certainly not that much organisation within the European Tour with regards to security and cameras and click, 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 click all the time going on, and distractions. I found that disconcerting early on, but I managed, I think we helped it along. I won tournaments most years. I got a bit of a kick in the teeth in 1972 in the championship when I was leading coming down the 71st hole and Trevino chipped in, and sadly I sort of got a bit impatient and didn't quite get that done that week. But that took a lot of confidence away from me. It was it happened as things do in life. I mean, he chipped in 5 times the last 2 rounds, and I was playing with him, and to do it at that most critical time, so close to the end, as I say, my patience, and his luck didn't run out, but my patience did, and I was never the same quite after that. It took a bit of that self-confidence and resolve away. That's
really interesting, because all sports require a rock-solid mentality, don't they? But none more so than golf. So 3 years earlier, there you are as a young man on the 18th, very, very difficult shot, but it was never in doubt because you were so solid mentally. And then 72, where you've got the Open, you've got one hand on the jug perhaps, Trevino chips in, and you're still in a good position even when he chips in, but then it all, like a pack of cards, disintegrates.
But as I say, and I can recollect it like it was yesterday, my reaction to his fifth chip in on the 7th, because he was over the green in 4 and I was just short of it in 2. and he chips in for 5, and my reaction was, you son of a gun, you're not going to beat me like that. And I took a rush at this putt, which was about 15-footer, and I hit it that awkward distance by, 2.5 feet, whatever it was, and I missed it coming back. The reality of that all came, over that 2.5-footer. I'd put myself now under unnecessary pressure, and I missed it, and of course he was in no time flat. He was on the 18th tee and he'd hit off and he was down the middle of the fairway. I didn't even finish second in the end. Jack nicked in between him and I. But it did big damage to my mental process, and I never thought prior to that luck was involved to the degree that it certainly he experienced, in front of me and it sort of broke something snapped in there from a major championship standpoint. I never really featured again, but I won tournaments, and I won tournaments by big numbers too. I mean, Scandinavian Open I won by 12 or 13 shots, and Bogota by 13 shots, but it was the majors that I wanted more than anything. I'd set my heart on that early, and they're the ones that you're recognised for. There are epitome for professional golfers. If to a career without a major is an empty career as far as I'm concerned, or was concerned.
Sorry.
Brilliant. Okay, we're good? So when you say the words Tony Jacklin, people think of a lot of things, but probably most of all, they think of either the Open and the US Open, those majors that you won, and secondly, the Ryder Cup. Now, before we go into the glory years where you led Europe, as it became, as a non-playing captain to victory and set the foundations, people forget that you also played in so many Ryder Cups, 7 in fact in total, and 67 was your first, and then 69, I think people also remember you for 69, partly because you were absolutely at the top of your game, but also because during a run both before and after where America just basically, the Ryder Cup, oh yes, that's where America wins. Well, they didn't that year. And of course, it's also famous for what remains not just one of the most talked about, most famous, some people say controversial, most say one of the most sporting occasions that happen, not just in golf, but in sport at all. So perhaps if you could, as you've already said, your Ryder Cup experience began way before that, when you were a kid and it was your first opportunity to see global stars. So really, the Ryder Cup is ingrained in you one way or another from a very early age right up to today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've always enjoyed that encounter with American friends. I think it's important to talk a bit more about the confidence the Americans came into this thing with, and I've got a great theory that whether I'm right or wrong, but I think I'm right. They had Hollywood, and they had Hollywood for well over 100 years, and Hollywood projected America around this world like nothing else because they always won. John Wayne always came in, and the cavalry were following afterwards, and everybody had a tear in their eye, and the USA always won. Well, this is the way they acted on the golf course when all this supreme confidence, and I'd been over there playing their tour, and I was playing alongside them, and I learnt to beat them, quite frankly, and that was it. So I wasn't fearful personally anymore, but I'd had my experiences. Many of my countrymen hadn't had those experiences, but I think they appreciated how tough it was to go over there and do what I did. I won a couple of Jacksonville Opens as well as the US Open. So when we got there in '69, having won that Open, I think it must have sort of filtered down the team, that if Jacko can do it, well, why can't we, sort of thing. And it was a marvellous week. It was a different format to what we play today. And I actually played Jack Nicklaus twice on the last day in the singles. And we played in the morning, and he really wasn't playing, you know, on top of his game. I beat him 4-3. And long story short, by the late afternoon, I held a 50-foot putt on the 17th. It was crazy. I mean, you're trying to get it in, but it was an element of good fortune. It went in to square the match, and we stood on 18T, all square, and the matches were all square. And it was an unenviable situation as far as I was concerned. And we both hit tee shots down the last hole, and I was racing off ahead, and Jack hollered at me from behind, "Tony." So I waited, he caught me up, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "We're walking. You nervous?" I said, "Jack, I'm petrified." He said, "I just thought I'd ask, because if it's any consolation, I feel exactly the same way you do." Which you know, was nice. He put it in perspective, and as nice as it could be, but all your teammates are around the green, and there's thousands of people there, you know, not knowing what's going to happen. We both hit good shots. Mine rolled to the back of the green, he was a bit inside me, and I putted up 20 inches to 2 feet short. The greens weren't quite the same in those days as they are today. So I marked my ball, and he had a 20-footer, 18-footer maybe, to win outright for America. And he ran it 4.5 feet or 5 feet past, which was a shocking, you know, there was a sort of pregnant silence all around the green. And I'm just stood there thinking, whatever happens, I got to make this putt. You know, I'm going to have to make this putt, whatever happens. And like the great player he is, he knocked his putt in. And prior to picking his ball out of the hole, he picked my marker up, and then picked his ball out, and he handed me the ball, conceding the putt, saying, "I don't believe you'd have missed that, but I would never give the opportunity in these circumstances," which was unbelievable. And, you know, tie, first tie in Ryder Cup history, and a gesture that was just unparalleled, you know, in our game. Because, I mean, the American team, captained by Sam Snead, there were a lot of old, lot of mean-spiritedness in there, you know, mixed in with. They were all tough guys. These brought up the hard way in the 40s and 50s, and you know, and you don't do things like that, you know, when it comes to Ryder Cup. Yeah, I think Snead was quoted as saying, "We didn't come over here to be good old boys," words to that effect. But Jack, of course, said nobody said anything personally to him, because he was so respected anyway. And we tied, and you know, we built a golf course all those years later. It's been open 10 years now in Florida. It's a very successful private club called The Concession, and part of history, and it's a lovely story. And Jack was always the consummate sport. You know, 18 majors, 19 seconds and 11 thirds or whatever. Nobody will ever touch that record. It was a wonderful time, and he said it a dozen times, you know, it was the right thing to do. I'd do it every time, you know, it's just the way you saw it.
And if the shoe had been on the other foot, what ifs and buts I know, would you
Well,
have, would you have done?
It's difficult. I think I would. It's fantasy. I mean, the point was I'd won the Open 2 months before. We were good friends, but more than that, golf had won. You know, they had a British champion for the first time in 18 years, and he didn't want to see anything happen to spoil that. And, you know, that was all to do with his generosity. I was a good friend as well, and we've remained that way for 47, well, I've known him now for 50 years, we've been close.
For the next 5 Ryder Cups, which you played in, America dominated, America won them all, to the point actually in 79, which was your last Ryder Cup as a player, that he decided it had become so one-sided that it couldn't be America versus Britain and Ireland anymore. It would have to be America versus Europe, the whole of the continent. Now, looking back, I don't know how you felt at the time, but it was a bit of a. We talked about the word concession. It was a concession that you're not good enough to take on America. You need the cavalry. You need some reinforcements.
Well, what happened in 79 was due to what happened in 77. Tom Weiskopf got picked to play for America and didn't turn up. He went to shoot some goat in Alaska because it was a foregone conclusion as far as that, and that sort of the writing was on the wall. I mean, that was the first time anybody from either side had got picked for the Ryder Cup and didn't turn up. And so that prompted Jack to write to Lord Derby, who was the president of the PGA, and say, look, you've got to involve Europe and to, make the team stronger. Well, there was a lot of people against that. I wasn't one of them. But I thought it was a good thing that should happen. And we had Seve Ballesteros, who was on the rise. He won the championship in 79 out of the car park at Lytham, wherever it was. And we had some good European players coming along. So we turned up at the Greenbrier for the first European match, which ended up being my final match. And again, we got beaten, well beaten. They set the course up to suit themselves. I mean, the Greens were putting about 14, and we weren't used to that, but we got well beaten anyway. And then I didn't get invited in 81. I just missed out. I wasn't a captain's pick either. And I'd done with the establishment by then. It was a long story. I won't bore you with it. But Seve was also barred from playing Ryder Cup in 81 because his manager was insisting on appearance fees for him because he put 50% on the gate if he turned up. And of course he wasn't there, I wasn't there at Walton Heath, and again we got beaten substantially, and the writing started to come up, are we ever going to get this done again? And so I was quite shocked in 83 when I was invited, and this was the year of the Ryder Cup. Normally they invite a captain 18 months or so before, and obviously behind the scenes there was turmoil, and I was invited in April or so of 83 you could have knocked me down with a feather. But I was in a position where I didn't really care. I certainly didn't care for what the establishment had been doing 2 years before. So I was in a position to make some demands because I'd recognised there was things that we weren't doing that we should have been doing. And as I said earlier, America had all this supreme confidence. We were flying in the back of the bus, wearing anything anybody would give us. We couldn't take our caddies with us. And by the time we got to the first tee, our self-esteem was about this big. They were already 2 up and they hadn't even a shot. So I started demanding, obviously first-class travel, the best of clothing, caddies to travel, a team room where we could gel as a team and get that sort of team unity going. And they kept saying yes. And so I said, well, on that basis, I'll do it. And then I remember vividly going to Lord Derby and saying, what about Seve? Because he was mad, quite rightly so. And Derby said, well, it's your problem now. You've accepted a captain's job. And so I made my first mission was to sit Seve down and had breakfast, Prince of Wales Hotel a week later in Southport. And he was venting, and as he would. And I said, well, I've accepted this captain's role, but I can't do it without you. I can do everything off the course, but I need you on the course. You're the general, you're the man everybody fears. He was the best player on the planet. And in the end, he said, okay, I help you. And it was amazing. The rest history, really. We came within a point of winning in Palm Beach Gardens. That year, the best performance we'd ever had in America, and we were all very, very down. We'd gone so close. And I can see a line now, I've got a video at home of it, there's on the dais, very, very low. Every face was, and it was Seve again that looked along and he said, hey, this is not a time to be so sad. He said, this is the best we've ever done in America. It's a great performance. And course, he was right when we put it all in perspective, and we took that as a, we took it to the Belfry in '85. The momentum was unbelievable. Nucleus of the team were the same. We had a couple of new major winners coming on board in Europe. Woosnam and Alasbel was coming along, and there was Faldo was already there. We had some great players, and front of the home crowd, got it done for the first time in 28 years. And Langer was 28 years old at the time, and I remember him saying, for me, 28 years is a very long time, and of course it had been. And we were on the roof at the Belfry. I was sleeping there last night, funnily enough, and that memory will last forever. I was on Sam Torrance's shoulders in a very precarious position, but champagne was flowing, and it was the beginning of a wonderful run. '87, of course, we won for the first time on American soil at Jack's course in Muirfield Village. And I might just say that, he was probably the only one. I mean, his reputation and his persona was so held in such great regard, it didn't hurt his career, to be the first losing captain. And but it did wonders for our self-esteem and confidence, and we went on and tied again at the Belfry in '89, which meant we retained it. And I felt it was time for me to leave, because, there's nowhere else to go with it. We'd won home and away, and I'd been convinced to do it one more time at home, probably thinking I was pushing my luck. But, to come out with a tie and just, retain it was enough, and it would have been self-indulgent to keep on doing it. It was time for somebody else to take the reins.
Since you departed from being captain, there have been many great captains, many great names, many great victories, many great moments. But you must be proud to know what a part you played in hauling Europe up, to be upright, to be winning, because it's carried on. It hasn't dropped off. The run of success has been remarkable.
Well, at that point in time, I was the one that went to America first and stayed there and played and learnt how to beat them. And I was probably 12 or 15 years older than most of my team by the time I took over. And I think they respected the fact that I'd had the experience and done, and that's why they were very happy to let me, do it my way, if that's the right expression. And, it was soon after that, well, by then, they were experiencing what I'd experienced in America. Seve was winning in America. Faldo was winning in America. Langer was winning in America. Woosey was winning in America. So, it was timing is everything in life. And we just happened, at that time, it was a golden time for European golf. We got it right. And, it's been right for quite some time since when it comes to Ryder Cup competition.
And it's become an incredible sporting event now, but both to play in, obviously, but also the crowds, the TV coverage. It's become this, in a nice way, a monster.
Yeah, well, next to the Olympic Games and the World Cup soccer, I mean, it's right up there as a team thing. And I think it's amazing how the general public do relate to team, or seem to relate to team more than they do individual. And there's no doubt that there's a passion comes about this thing that, and of course you couldn't write a script for what's happened in some recent Ryder Cups when it's all looks like it's lost, and the pressure comes in and stuff happens that you couldn't write a script for. So no, it's captured the imagination of the sporting world. There's no doubt about it.
And also, players have become almost more synonymous with the Ryder Cup than actually individual performances. Ian Poulter seems to be a different animal. Colin Montgomery obviously enjoyed huge success as a player, but again, as in the Ryder Cup, he became a force of
Sergio
nature.
the same way. I mean, Sergio hasn't up to now got the major done, but he's been a tremendous force as well in Ryder Cup. You're right. I mean, There's something in this team that that rubs off on these guys. All of a sudden they put their personal interests and behind them and feel that they can contribute to the fullest extent as individuals in the team, and it's extraordinary. And you better be on your blub when you get picked for that Ryder Cup, because there's no hiding place out there. You know, there's an expectation from the public and the home crowd if you're at home, and your team, and you're all intertwined. You know, it's not about you. It's about the team. So there's more pressure. There's no doubt. There's more pressure. I mean, selfish. You win majors. That's a very selfish, singular pursuit to do that. But that Ryder Cup coming down that last hole at Birkdale in '69, and all your teammates are sitting around the green, waiting to see what you're going to do, and that's pressure. You know, that's real pressure, and needless to say, you know, the thousands of fans there and at home that are watching on television. It's unbelievable. It really is.
Tough one to call this year, though, Tony, in some sense, because it's in America. Some of the old guard of the European team may be reaching the end. There's going to be some new names, new faces, not familiar with the added pressures of the Ryder Cup, and presumably the Americans must be quite close to having had enough of being beaten by the Europeans.
Yeah, well, you know, it's at Hazeltine, ironically, where I won my US Open, which is, I'll be there, obviously. I'm a member at the club, and I should be watching closely. Yeah, I mean, the teams, as we sit here, are an unknown quantity, but there are a lot of very good young players in America now. Davis Love, who's the American captain, has had experience. It wasn't a good one. It was stolen away at the last minute in Medina from him. But of course, he's got that experience going for him, and he'll be wanting revenge. There's no doubt about that. And there's a lot of very good young players on that tour. Our team is an unknown quantity at this time. We'll do well to retain it. We need to get off to a fast start. That's what we need. We need at the end of the first day to be at least level or ahead. If they assert their authority early, it's going to be very tough for Darren Clarke's team this year.
Now, playing the Ryder Cup is difficult enough. Being the captain is a completely different set of skills. It's you're handling 12 human beings, 12 egos. They're not all going to get what they want, and you've got to somehow find the best pairings, the best teams. Doesn't necessarily, in fact, it doesn't really go on form. It goes on getting the right mix. It's a very demanding role to have.
It is, especially today, because it's become such a media frenzy, and everything is dissected. And why did he do this? And why did he do that? Which you know, I did a lot from here, gut feeling. It's very hard to do that today. You know, what did you do that for? They didn't win, you know, or whatever. And you know, at the end of the day, the buck stops at the captain, and it's not an easy job. It's great if you win, but you've got to do a lot of this, a lot of praying. That way, you make your decisions, you get your pairings as good as they can be. But it's about momentum in the end, and it ebbs and flows, and you've got to pray a lot and do everything right. I mean, there's so many guys involved now. I don't know how many vice captains there are, and this, that, and the other. I never had vice captains, you know. Bernard Gallagher was my runner. He was with me when I was doing it. But now it's got to a point where there's a lot of advice, and sometimes, you know, too many cooks can spoil the broth. So we'll see. That's why we go.
Let's just quickly go back to the Open, because it's almost upon us, and very difficult always to say, oh, he will win, or it's between those two, because it doesn't work like that. You don't have to be the best golfer in the world, do you, to win a major? You just need to be the best golfer for that week.
For that week, exactly. And sometimes, you know, you can be fortunate with the weather. Your first 2 rounds is a bit of a crapshoot, really. I mean, you know, if you get the right tee time and the weather's not. But getting ahead early is important. You can't win the first 2 rounds, you can lose it. But just staying in the mix early on, But having, I think one of the top 15 players in the world is going to end up victorious. I don't think there'll be many surprises there. I would be very surprised if it was, some obscure name that won at the end of the day. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
And also, what's interesting is 2 years ago, Rory McIlroy the world was at his feet. People were saying things like, "Oh, he's going to go on and match Jack," and then suddenly, from seemingly nowhere, this young American kid, Jordan Spieth, wins everything, and then he has a little bit of a sort of a mental crisis. And Jason Day is now enjoying his golf, but nobody actually, as is the way with golfers, actually saying, no, this is my game for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it's pretty open, isn't it? Roy seems
Very
to be
open.
suggesting he's coming back.
I mean, ambition has no nationality. You don't know what's going on in these young minds, and there's so much talent. The interesting thing is they're getting younger. And, when you're young, you're so resilient and you're so elastic, you can bounce back, and you've got this resilience going for you. And there's a lot of talent out there. So it's going to be fascinating to see who, I think, with a good start, you get engaged mentally at a higher level early. And if it's in you to do it, but whoever wins it will have put it in there first. And it helps a lot if you've done that, because you're not shocked when that final day comes and you're walking with a chance to win down the 18th hole. You've got to, if you've put it in there, and Seve did it, Player did it, Nicholas did it, they all did it. Visualization, seeing their name at the top of the leaderboard, living it really before it happens. And it's never easy, but with that mentality, you feel more comfortable with all the pressure that you've got to deal with. It still comes down to putting one foot in front of another.
And I guess as well, if you're Nicholas or Ballesteros or Jacklin, certainly for 2 or 3 years, it's not only being comfortable seeing your name at the top of the leaderboard, but also knowing that the opposition see your name at the top of the leaderboard and think, oh, I've got to try and topple Jacko or Nicholas or Seve, and boy, that's not going to be easy.
That's right. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, people talk to me, and it's difficult to put a finger on this, but many golfers I consider friends, but more than anything, I see them as having been travelling companions. We were all so competitive. It was hard to get really, really close as friends. I mean, Jack now, and Jack's 76, I'm 72. We are friends now, we're pals. If there's a problem and either can help, it's the way we go. But as you're younger, your doctors become your close friends, your lawyer becomes your close friend, it could be your neighbour that's your close friend, somebody at the club, you just get attracted to. But we were so competitive as golfers in my younger life. I looked upon them as, and we had dinner at night, we had good times and we laughed. But when you get your game face on the next morning, you want to beat their brains out. So it's just the way it is. It's a competitive world I've enjoyed all my life, and I have much respect for all the great players that I've played alongside and played with. I think we have a mutual respect for each other that exists, that is larger than friendship, if that makes any sense at all.
You'll be going to the Open, presumably. Why are you there? What will you be doing?
Well, I'm at the championship at Troon. I'm looking forward very much to it. I shall be staying at Trump Turnberry, where I've enjoyed many. I've been going there for over 50 years. And I shall be there on a daily basis, greeting and meeting the Glenmorangie guests from all over the world. They'll be coming in. I shall be at the Glenmorangie tent. We're doing various lunch every day, and there's gatherings in the evening at Turnberry, where I shall try and wax lyrical about some of my Open Championship experiences. There have been many, and they're fond memories, I must say. And, you know, if they've got questions, some of these younger folk, it's all changed a lot in the last 53 years since I played my first Open, but it's in a healthy state, our game, and the likes of the companies like Glenmorangie and Moët Hennessy, who are the parent company, being involved in our game really helps it along tremendously. And I'm the ambassador for the brand, and I'm very proud of that. And it's a great brand, and I think the involvement in the Open Championship for the last 5 years or so has helped the brand along. And you know, we certainly have an appreciation in the business of golf for great sponsorship. And from that point of view, young players, sponsors, the game is in a very healthy state, far healthier than it was when I turned professional in 1962 anyway.
And one final topic, Tony, we've talked about the Open, we've talked about the Ryder Cup, both happening this year. One other thing is happening this year which is unique, and that is that golf, after a long absence, returns to the Olympics. Although, as we speak to each other today, the players are dropping like flies in terms of withdrawing from the Rio Olympics. Now, that in one sense seems a shame. I know you have a view about golf at the Olympics.
Well, I did. You know, this was bubbling up some 4 or 5 years ago when the word got out that there was going to be reintroduced. But personally, I've never seen golf as an Olympic sport. I have to just say that. It's just my feeling. It's the truth. And professionals in there as well. You know, if golf were to be represented, I see it more. It should be by amateurs. And there was a consensus on our tour, on the PGA Tour, a blind thing, that no names, but there were about 70%, I think, came and thought that the game was in a healthy state without the Olympics. And we have our Olympics in the Masters and the Open, the US Open, and the PGA Championship. And most of my fellow professionals around the world would just as lieve own a claret jug as own an Olympic gold medal. And I think this is coming out now. I think there was a sort of move thinking that it would help grow the game if we were in the Olympics, and we're all talking about growing the game. But I think there's other ways we need to look at, you know, encouraging juniors and more clubs, getting kids involved at some of the more stuffy clubs, especially in Great Britain, and getting around the golf course quicker, some alternative options to the golf ball that we're using. There are many things that can be done to grow the game. And of course, whoever wins that gold medal this year, sadly, is going to know that he hasn't beaten the best in the world, because a lot of the best in the world are not going.
So it's got a bit messy, hasn't it? It's not really going to help the Olympics because so many of the golf stars, the true stars, aren't playing, and it's not really helping golf either for the same reason.
Well, that's right. And of course it was a test anyway. It was this year in 2020, and one thinks, I think, that they'll drop it like a hot potato after 2020. That would be my opinion, unless they do something to change the attraction of it, like introducing it as an amateur thing. But that's not my problem. I'm just an observer now. But my feeling has always been that, you know, I think about the Olympic Games, I see it as track and field, I see, you know, all the obvious golf just doesn't fit in there some way in my mind, but maybe I'm wrong.
And finally, Tony, I'm now going to give you the keys to the sport. You can do anything you like. You're in charge globally of golf. Now, you mentioned just now that still too many stuffy clubs, even today, too many stuffy clubs. Muirfield, which I know is one of your favourite golf courses in the world, is embroiled, self-made mess about not voting for women members. They're now forcing to have another vote very quickly. there are still issues which you think wouldn't still be around in 2016. So you're in charge, Tony. What would you do?
Well, I think Muirfield's a bit like Brexit. I think there's a lot of people regret that decision, and I think they want to reshuffle and to have another go. Now, whether Brexit's going to be allowed to do that, who knows? But, you know, golf should be available to as many people as possible. I mean, there's a lot of good things going on, but essentially we've got to bring the kids into it, the next generation. It all goes past so quick, life. And, you know, we've all seen, it's not a matter of nationalities. If you're exposed to the thing early, it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese, Japanese, English, Belgian, it doesn't matter where you come from. And so we need to think about that and just make the game more available and, you know, encourage junior tournaments. I mean, I had a wonderful last 25 years watching my youngest son. We took him to Florida tournaments and junior events, and we see it's a wonderful game for young people. The disciplinarian, I've seen them in tears, and it's such a tough, you know, to take what golf gives you, you know, all the way you can go 15, 16 holes and then you make a triple, and it's heartbreaking, you know, especially if you're this high. But you learn, and it toughens you up, and it's a great game, and it's a microcosm of life. It's the best game ever. There's no question about it. I know it's hard, but it takes you into God's outer doors. Takes you that we can go anywhere in the world nowadays and meet good people. People who play golf are pretty patient. You know, they wouldn't be playing very long if they weren't. They're pretty good sorts generally, whether they're Australian. If you play golf, you're my friend anyway. And I think we need to just open it up to more youngsters and encourage the youngsters as much as we can.
And you mentioned Florida. You've got a house in Florida next to a golf course, near to a white beach. It's 12-month a year sunshine. Your name remains famous, despite the fact you're now into your 70s. Everybody, certainly everybody of a certain age, knows exactly who you are. All in all, Tony Jacklin, it's been some journey from the son of a truck driver in Scunthorpe who spent a year working in the steelworks. It's some journey.
No, it's been a magic. I've had a fantastic life. What can I tell you? I mean, it was. It's been an adventure, and that's what it was supposed to be. You know, I suppose as much as anything, I was always quite open-minded, and I had a go, and I never thought about consequences much. You know, what if it was? I had a positive outlook. I always thought about winning. Other people have said to me, you know, well, what if you hadn't done it? I thought, well, it never crossed my mind that I wasn't going to do it. But maybe I was a bit stupid, I don't know. But it's certainly been an adventure. I mean, obviously, the rewards for my generation weren't quite as what they are today, but it didn't diminish the fun we had doing it and the times we had. And, you know, what we're supposed to do is set the table for the generation after. I think we did that.
Okay, Tony, thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome.